All right, welcome Langorinos to our first episode of LanGoPod. This is a podcast all about how to use linguistic principles for more effective language learning. And we are members of the LanGo team. LanGo is a language school in Dallas. We're located in Koreatown, Dallas on I-35 and Royal Lane. And we're not your ordinary language school. Our mission is to produce awesome language learning experiences for our community and for our students. And another unique thing about us is that we're all linguists. All of our teachers have linguistic background. And as part of our podcast team, we have our main host of our podcast is Peter. And I'm going to turn it over to him to introduce himself. And then Tyler will go.
Greetings, Langorinos. My name is Peter. I have a PhD in linguistics from University of Hawaii. I focus on language conservation, formal syntax, phonology, and Austronesian linguistics. Tyler?
Tyler. Hi, everyone. I'm the instructor here at LanGo in Japanese, Chinese, French, and German, and occasionally English. And my main interests among languages are the Indo-European family, that's the language that English belongs to, the Sino-Tibetan family, to which Chinese belongs, and one or two other languages here and there.
Wonderful. And I'm Lisa. I have my PhD in linguistics from Rice University, and my MA and BA from UNT. And my main interest, my focus in linguistics is on sociolinguistics, so how language varies and changes based on the social. I'm also interested in designing language programs based in language science. And we're all very excited to kick off this first episode here. I'm going to turn it over to Peter to introduce our episode 1.
Okay, so the first episode is entitled, What Are Words Made Of? And we're going to focus on the difference between letters and sounds, which should bring us to our first slide, which is called Words Are Not Letters.
And enjoy the picture of the cute baby for a moment. We'll explain that in a second.
All right, so the first point we have to make is, what is a natural language? And this stands in contrast to things like a computer language, which is a stipulated unnatural language for the purpose of this conversation. So natural languages are spoken and signed.
But question, what about
everywhere around the world.
Klingon? Do they fit into your conception?
For the purposes of this conversation, Klingon is not a natural language because it was constructed by linguists.
On Lang. Mm-hmm.
Even though it is spoken. But
it is spoken though, yeah. There's quite a large community of Klingon speakers.
There are some people who speak Klingon as a natural language. Is my understanding that there are babies who learned Klingon as a first language, which therefore would make it a natural language. So that is some important nuance. If you learned a language that was made up by somebody as an adult, for now, we're not going to count it as a natural language. Yeah. But in the case that babies learn it, as you can see in our picture, then it becomes a natural language. And it's important to note that babies learn, as the slide says, babies learn the language of their environment, and any language a child learns this way can be referred to as their first language. People do not learn writing as babies. They don't learn to write a language naturally as an infant. But children that are exposed to a community of speakers or signers, if they're using a sign language, will naturally acquire the language of their environment.
So for example, my little Eloise, she's being exposed to both English and Korean. So my hope is that she'll acquire those sounds right away.
And both of them would then be her first language.
Indeed.
So what about you, Lisa? Do you have 2 first languages?
I do. Yep, I learned English and Korean at the same time too, similarly.
Okay, so for the purpose of our conversation, a first language is whatever you learn as a baby, even if it's more than one language, but it's not writing.
right? In fact, they say writing is the man's greatest or human's greatest invention, right?
It has been extremely helpful. So first we need to, when we're talking about the difference between writing and speaking, this is important for language learners because letters are not the same thing as sounds often. Now, to demonstrate this, we're going to use the idea of homophones. If you have never heard of a homophone before, that is two words that sound the same, but they are spelled differently and typically also have different meanings. This is usually what we're talking about. But in this case, since we're just focusing on writing versus sounds, the important part is that they are spelled differently. Our first example here is hire, as in when a company hires an employee, and the other word, the other homophone, is higher. Sounds the same, but the meaning is high as opposed to low. This is higher than that. They're spelled differently. In case you're listening and not watching, hire, the verb to acquire an employee is H-I-R-E, and higher as opposed to lower is H-I-G-H-E-R. So very different spellings, but as far as I can tell, the same pronunciation.
Right, and that's going to be really challenging for language learners of English.
Absolutely.
Here's a nice set, another nice set.
The next one is 2, 2, and 2. The first one is the number 2. The second one is 2, meaning also, or in excess. And the final one is to, the preposition, or infinitive marker. So, to swim versus I swam too much versus I swam 2 miles.
Nice.
Those are the 3 different meanings of to there, spelled T-W-O, T-O-O, and T-O, but all pronounced the same.
Although I would like to note that T-O especially has lots of variant forms in which it can occur. It can be
Yes.
It can be reduced, yeah, that's true.
I encounter that a lot with my English learning students.
The next one is there, and there. The first one meaning they are. The second one is the possessive for third plural in English, so their house. And the final one is there, as in kind of a direction or an empty subject, like there's pizza in the fridge.
We're over
And their
there.
spelling is very different, even though they're pronounced all 3 the same.
Mm-hmm.
That sentence you just said, you had 2 of them. They're very high frequency too.
That's right. All 3 are pretty high frequency.
They're so high frequency, I think also they're misspelled often, right?
This is a big, internet talking point, I will call it, where people often use misspellings of there to attack someone's argument online, as opposed to interpreting the intention. You can understand why people would misspell these regularly, as they all sound the same. The distinction between them is taught in their spelling. It is not when you acquire the sounds as a child. We could say maybe there is a dictionary in your mind, and all 3 of them have the same spelling with sounds in your mind. The next pair is meat and meat. The first one being meat as in the type of food, and the second one meet as in when 2 people connect to each other or are first introduced for the first time. So meet, M-E-A-T, versus meet, M-E-E-T, but both pronounced exactly the same. The next one is prey and prey. The first sort of prey is the kind that a predator hunts, predator and prey, P-R-E-Y. The second one is P-R-A-Y, as in praying mantis, or the way a religious person might pray, but they are spelled differently and pronounced exactly the same, as is the theme of this whole column. So the next one is through and through. The first through is spelled T-H-R-O-U-G-H, and that is as when you go through a tunnel. The second one is through, T-H-R-E-W, as in the past tense of throw, when you threw a ball. Again, spelled differently, pronounced the same. Our final example is blue and blue. The first one is the color, spelled B-L-U-E, and the second one is the past tense of blow, spelled B-L-E-W. There are many, many, many more, and I suggest you make a list yourself and see which ones you can think of.
I'd also like to point out there are cases of homophones where they're in fact spelled the same but are still different words. You have to found, where found that's the infinitive, or the past tense found of find. I would call those homophones too. Would you guys as well?
I agree.
Absolutely.
So that spelling, that they're spelled differently, is not really central to the definition.
Right.
It's not central to the definition, but it's important to point out that something can be spelled differently and yet pronounced the same way, because there's a big distinction between sounds and spelling.
Right.
Okay, continuing with our discussion of letters versus sounds, I'm going to introduce some linguistic conventions to help further investigate this point of sounds versus writing.
Let's get linguistic-y now.
Right. You're going to see this throughout the podcast and future podcasts. We have a little note that will pop up whenever we introduce really linguistic terms, which we're calling linguisticy, because the linguisticy note.
In fact, there he is. They're sticky.
Oh, great.
There it is right there. Please find this in the blog too. We are using it.
And our upcoming book.
And the upcoming book, which we'll talk a little more about shortly. So the first convention I'd like to introduce is angled brackets. We use this to indicate written versions of a word. So I have here the written representation of a verb. A written representation is also called orthographic. It's not that important for this.
Or just the spelling in everyday English.
Right. We use slanted brackets to indicate the sounds that are represented in the speaker's mind. Now, these sounds that exist in the mind are called conventionally phonemes in English. Phone, as in telephone, means sound. So we're going to examine our list of homophones again, but this time we're going to look at the difference between spellings and the sounds you have in your mind.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the first one, going back again, we look at higher and higher. How I have higher, both words are transcribed here as H, A high front glide, and R. Now, this might introduce some complexity, particularly for people listening, not watching, but we have a problem when we want to represent sounds in the mind, in that some vowels are longer and shorter, and some vowels are composed of multiple articulations.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to, so there's a difference, for example, between tu and tu. Right? You can hear the difference in that. We have those as one of our, thankfully, that's our next homophone, so you can see they're both spelled the same way.
As you mentioned, yeah.
So in the case of higher, I hear not har, but I hear I, this sound, and I'm representing it with two vowels that are one vowel. Another way to represent this is with a vowel and what we call a glide. So you may have learned sometimes Y as a vowel. Well, this is somewhat similar to what we're doing in linguistics. We can use Y or the small cap I's that I have there as the semi-glide for the Y sound that can be attached to I, or W for the extended sound that goes with to in English. Moving on to there, and there, they're all represented the same.
Let's note that this representation we're using of the sounds is in IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet Notation. And we're going to do a whole episode on this next time. But we just want to show you how, in general, thanks, Tyler, we represent the sounds here using the IPA.
Exactly. Thank you, Lisa. We will get more into what is IPA, International Phonetic Alphabet, in the future. But for now, suffice it to say, these are the mental targets we're going for. And these representations all have convention. If you were to Google it or reach out to us, we could point you towards many wonderful resources to learn more about IPA. Moving on to our next homophone, which is meet and meet. They are both spelled the same way in the mind, M-I-T. And this is interesting because what we're seeing is the vowels used in writing are rarely the same as the vowels used in the mind. Now in one of them, the possessive one, it's very similar to the representation that I have given here in phonemes. Another person might give a representation that looks similar to there with EY. That's a conventional difference. What we see with meat is consistently the vowel E is pronounced as E. If you study other languages, of course you know the vowel E is almost always pronounced as A in other languages.
Oh, you're talking about the vowel letter E with the 3 lines, right? This always gets very confusing. Sound E, vowel E. So let's
Therein lies the rub, right? Letters versus sounds. That's why we're talking about this.
vowel shift. So you're talking about E, right?
Yes, I'm alluding to the great vowel shift, which could be a topic of future conversation. Our next one is pray. And here again, we have a problem with trying to represent the sounds in the mind with writing, even when we're just talking about the sounds and we're not using conventional writing. So we have P, R, E, and then our small front vowel for pray. If you are looking on the video, you might have noticed that the R that we are using for our phonemic representations is upside down. It's different than the R we use when we write in English.
Mm-hmm.
This particular R is used to represent, in IPA, to represent the kind of R we have in English. You might not know it, but the R we have in English is not extremely common. And that's why it has a special symbol in the writing. Moving on, we have through. And here you see that the TH is represented with a theta.
Theta symbol, yeah.
And the TH in there is represented with a thorn, which I believe is the technical name.
No, that's an eth. That's not a thorn.
Ev.
An eth, right? An eth is great because that tells you the distinction. Here we have in writing TH as a sound of adha, the sound in between vowels. Then we have TH later as in atha. So there's a big difference between those two sounds in the mind. And we even distinguish 2 words this way, thigh and thy.
Mm-hmm.
Thy we don't use that much today, of course, but if you were to look into historical forms of English, it is a commonly used word in English of historical times.
Mm-hmm.
Ed and theta are the name of the 2 symbols. Okay, moving on to our final homophone for this section is blue and blue. And you can see that the spelling in the mind is almost a combination of the 2 spellings in the real world. So some are more and less close to their phonemic representation and their orthography. But the main point of this whole section is just that letters are distinct from sounds, and this might be something tricky when you're learning a language or even thinking about your own language, your native language.
Absolutely.
You have anything y'all want to add to that?
So much, but we'll save it for we'll save it for further discussion of IPA.
It certainly brings to mind the next slide, the question proposed on the next slide anyways. Why are words that sound the same spelled differently? And we've been hinting at it a little bit. It has to do with the history. So first we need to establish like a fundamental observation of the science of language. And that is that all languages change. All of them, all the time, at different rates. This is one of the most important contributions the study of language has to add maybe to our understanding of the way other people are. People will speak differently than you because their language, even if they speak English, is changing in different ways than your language, which may also be English. English used to be pronounced in a way that much more closely matches the way that it's spelled. Since then, sounds have changed more than the spellings have changed. So whenever a language is written, when it's first written, typically, the people who arrange the written system in a language try to make it as close to the way the words are really pronounced as possible. So a lot of times in languages that were first written more recently, their orthographies match the real pronunciations more, right? Tyler, maybe you can give us an example of a spelling in English that in the modern day doesn't look that way very much, but how it used to sound that way.
There's so many in English.
So one of my favorite sequences of letters to look at on this topic is O-U-G-H.
Mm-hmm.
I think all the words, there's a lot of very high frequency ones too that have this, and it's different in a lot of cases. We have through, where it's an oo sound, like in blue. We have tough, where it's an and a f. We have thorough, where it's an o diphthong, double vowel sound. What else am I forgetting?
Cough, different vowel, still F.
Which one?
Cough.
Cough, thank you.
Still F, yeah.
Through, thorough. Some people say thorough also, so it can be a schwa.
Thorough.
Those are the main ones. So that's what, 4 or 5 different pronunciations?
What was the historical?
On an older stage of English, the OU combination denoted oo, as it does in modern French still. We borrowed that convention from French. And the GH represented a velar fricative. That's a frictiony sound made with the back of the tongue, and it would have been a r or a ch. So it could have been voiced or voiceless. So ugh or ugh has given all these different reflexes, we call it in modern English, descendant sounds of the ancestral ones.
How does that work in cases like knight, as in knight in shining armor, where it's spelled K-N-I-G-H-T? What might the historical pronunciation of that have been? That's
my favorite example. I always use this with my English language learners.
So German has a cognate word. A cognate is a pair of cognates, or whatever, a set of cognates descend from the same word in an earlier language stage. They have a word knecht, K-N-E-C-H-T, can you spell it? It doesn't mean knight, it means servant. But it goes back to the same original word. And as you hear, knecht, German keeps the k sounding before the n. So in older stages of English, we did that too, and that sort of went out of style at a certain point. They stopped doing gna and kna sequences word initially, just left the nasal there. And so that ch spelling in German represents the same family of sounds as that English gh that we just talked about.
So in English, it would have been something like knickte, right?
Knicht.
Nicht.
Nicht.
With a k. Knicht.
Knicht.
The listener may already notice this helps explain a very common homophone, no and no.
Right.
So we have know, to know, as in knowledge. It's spelled K-N-O-W. And we have no as in the opposite of yes, negative. And they're both pronounced no, yet we have K-N-O-W. So it must have been that in an earlier time in English, the K in K-N-O-W was pronounced. And after it was stopped being pronounced before N, then the two words sounded the same. So when English was being written and orthographies were being established, these two words were pronounced differently. And they're pronounced the same today because of language change. We can talk for a moment about sources of change over time. And the first important thing here to mention is right there in the title, time. So time is a constant variable, if that makes sense, meaning that over time, all languages will change, but there used to be a time when linguists would propose that a certain number of years would bring this amount of change and a certain number of thousands of years would, people have abandoned these ideas. No matter what, languages change over time, but it's not at a constant rate. They change in different ways for different reasons. These bring in our variable sources of change. We have several listed here, and we're talking about sound change over time, but you may notice some of these even today. Maybe you travel to another neighborhood that speaks a little differently than you do, or a country that speaks your language but a different version, and you may notice that geography migration, isolation or contact, age, gender, ethnicity, class, social network, ideologies, sports. Everything seems to affect what you're doing. So people tend to sound like their group. You may have noticed that if you hang out with your friends and they have an annoying thing they say, eventually you will catch yourself saying it.
It's probably easier to observe your siblings doing it, picking up speech habits from their friends rather than.
That's right. If you're fortunate enough to have siblings, you can observe that way as well.
Or unfortunate, as the case may be.
Or unfortunate. So I want to talk for a second about isolation or contact, because this is a bit of a binary feature, meaning either you were in isolation as a community or you were in contact. In my experience in the Pacific, you can look at so-called Eastern Polynesian languages, which include Hawaiian, Maori, spoken in New Zealand, and Rapa Nui, spoken on what in English is called Easter Island. All three of these languages came from the same language at a certain time in the past, perhaps 1,500 years ago or more.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is that Rapa Nui, the one spoken on Easter Island, was the first one to separate from the group. So over time, the Maori and Hawaiian kept having voyages with the Polynesian to contact Polynesians that were geographically in between them. Because of that, Hawaiian and Maori, even though it's separated by a great distance, are more similar to each other than they are to Rapa Nui, which was isolated and therefore changed the most because it didn't have the reassuring contact of its kind of relative communities. And contact, you can see it in your everyday life when you touch people, not physically.
Well, not
when
anymore.
Especially not now.
Those days are gone.
Even 6 feet away from someone, you can still change your language based on neighboring communities. So,
yeah, accommodation as well.
And we should point out that we're talking about things like pronunciations of single vowels or consonants, as well as new words, new phrases, all levels, right?
All levels of linguistics, all levels of language.
Even grammar.
Yes. And we'll talk more about variation in another episode too. Too much to talk about.
I can't wait for the variation podcast. I'm very excited to learn as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Very
excited. Even more linguistic-y on that topic later.
So I wanted to give one example of a very natural sound change. And this is the historic change of P to F to H. And for the simplicity of this conversation, we're representing these sounds as phonemes because they were phonemes in the speaker's minds at that time. In a future episode or a blog post, we'll expand on historical method and the conventions they use in comparative method.
Just a reminder, phoneme means a distinctive sound as represented in the mind. And let's also note about H, that letter name is a bit weird because it doesn't contain the sound in question. We're talking about the sound ha. Hello. Although, have you heard English speakers who call the letter H?
Oh, yeah.
I have in Australia.
They've restored that. They've rectified that little deficiency.
They've done the right thing.
It makes a lot more sense.
All right, so we want to look at modern languages because some of them have retained the P. With these arrows, I'm trying to indicate that P is the old sound in these languages, and that some made the change from P to F, and some made the change from F to H. And there's good physiological and phonetic reasons for this, right? You can see P, I'm going to move close to the camera, and if you're watching, you can see, I'll put P between vowels. Appa, appa. You can see my lips closing to touch together. When I make the F, affa, affa. You can see the lips come close together. Although in English, we make an F by touching the lips to the teeth. In some languages, they have a similar sound where both lips touch. Interesting theory about why that emerged in languages for another podcast.
Man.
I'm sorry, Tyler, you're going to have to wait for the explanation.
Listeners, you too. Listeners and watchers have to watch this space for that one.
This brings us a puzzle.
Being on the edge of your for a while.
Why F to H? Why would we have F to H? Because when you see the F, afa, and you see the H, aha. The lips don't move at all with the H.
There is no H to C.
There's no H to C. Well, the reason that the sound change is so natural is actually the acoustic properties when people hear it. So there's a mix of both that makes this sound change a very good example. So first among, that's what I was saying. Some languages retain the older sound. Our first example comes from Indo-European, and we can see a P to F change between Spanish and English, meaning Spanish has kept the older sound. I am not claiming that English came from Spanish.
No.
I'm claiming they both long enough ago, thousands of years ago, came from the same language and retained a word for father.
Just like you did not come from your older brother or sister.
That's right. Perfect analogy, Tyler. So in Spanish, the word for father is padre. And in English, it's father. I just used it.
These are cognates. So English and Spanish are related languages, and in an earlier stage, when they were the same language, these two modern words, were identified in the same ancestral word.
So the relationship between padre and father is more like a relationship between cousins than a relationship between parent and children.
Nice familial analogy.
Okay, our next example comes from Portuguese and Spanish, and it is the word for oven. So Portuguese uses the word forno that begins with an F. It's spelled F-O-R-N-O, and in Spanish uses the term horno, H-O-R-N-O. Now, this is a little bit of a sideways one because you don't pronounce the H in Spanish, but the spelling has kept it, which makes it a good example for the people watching. And the reason the spelling kept it is the same reason we have an H in honest, because it used to be pronounced at some point. So horno, the Spanish word for oven, was at one point pronounced horno.
Before we move on, let me briefly mention on that father word, the Irish cognate of this word, pachter, is aher. It loses its P, just like Spanish has lost that old P.
Is that P to F to H to
that
zero?
F, rather. That one was not a P, sorry. It's lost that F.
Is it to 0 or is it to H?
It becomes 0 in Spanish, in Irish.
For those that are listening, Tyler has written is that correct, the Indo-European form of father?
That's right, yeah.
Underneath
to the right of English father.
On the right side of the screen there. And for those listening, that is star. That's what you put before reconstructed forms. Star, P, capital H, because there's a laryngeal hypothesis for another podcast. Trust that capital H means a different thing from lowercase h.
Big podcast on IE.
We have to have one eventually.
Yeah.
It's P, capital H, T, E, R. So you can see that some things have changed, particularly the orthography has preserved some aspects of it. Our final example comes from Oceanic. Oceanic is a language family within the Austronesian language family. These languages are spoken in the Pacific. So I have selected 3 languages from the Pacific that represent different stages in the sound change P to F to H, because the Proto-Oceanic form, the common language they all descend from, had a P at the beginning of the word. The P is still reflected in Roviana, my favorite language, and it's from the Solomon Islands. And in the Roviana word, I think this word is used kind of like for building or meeting hall today, though it probably came from a word for house or building, is paile, and they've added an E in there, paile. In Samoan, the word for house or building can be fale. In Hawaiian, the word for house or building can be hale. So you have paile, fale, and hale. We're only focused on the P and F and H. So what happened is all these languages came from an ancestor language that had a P at the beginning of the word. And one of them, Roviana, retained the P. They kept the P. Samoan had a change from P to F. This probably happened at Polynesian level for Austronesian scholars listening. Then after this point, later, Hawaiian had a change of F to H.
A nice set of examples.
Yeah, those are the examples of just a small, tiny closed case of many sound changes are common. P to F to H was picked because it's such a famous sound change in the world of linguistics. The point where the next slide is going to be really relevant for the listener, which is that a single sound in your mind, we're calling it a phoneme, a single sound can have multiple pronunciations in different places, right? So we notice that, and of course sounds can change in one place and not another, but that will be discussed on another podcast. So I want you to recall the idea of a phoneme, which is a unit of sound in your mind. Sapir called it, a famous linguist, called it a mental target, right? So sticking with P, we're going to look at P in English, which has different acoustic properties in each environment. But the listener will recover the mental target of P in every instance. So when you look at P in pin, spin, and nip.
We're talking about English words now.
These are English words. Pin, spin, and nip. Indeed, P is a little bit different in each one. Now, we're representing the orthography, again, with angled brackets, and that will be in the lefternmost column on the examples. And then the phonemic form will be represented in slanted brackets. This is the mental targets. And then what actually comes out, the phonetic form, is represented in square brackets.
Voila.
Okay, so when we look at pin, we see that, first of all, we see this vowel again, which is, it's an E vowel, not an E. We don't say pin, we say pin in my dialect of English.
Yeah.
So, by the way, as a note, these transcriptions are transcriptions that the three of us more or less agreed upon, speaking English that we're all speaking in North Texas. It's somewhat similar. Different speakers of English will have different transcriptions, and even with the same pronunciation can be interpreted differently sometimes. Just as an aside.
Mm-hmm.
Taking my English as an example, when we look at pin, the P at the front of the pin is aspirated. Now, aspirated means, this is a linguistic-y problem. Aspirated refers to put simply, a small puff of air that's accompanied by the articulation of the P. In fact, there is a laryngeal mechanism, but we can talk about laryngeal mechanisms.
Maybe we can just mention briefly, there's sealing, for stop consonants, there's a sealing off of the articulatory apparatus at some point, buildup of pressure, and then an instantaneous release. And what makes a sound aspirated is you have a lot of air pressure built up and then a strong burst upon release. And would this be the time to demonstrate?
That's the next slide.
Coming up.
Okay, so thank you for the phonetic definition of aspiration, Tyler. Hopefully this gives you guys some idea what we're talking about when we say pin is aspirated. The P in pin is aspirated. And I'll show you how to test this on the next slide. But for now, bear with me. When we look at spin, as I have it transcribed here, in the phonemic form, of course, it's the same as the P in every other instance. But in the phonetic form, the square brackets, the P in spin does not have a puff of air. The puff of air, by the way, in pin is represented by a small little H up next to the P, to the right of the P. This is the convention in linguistics to represent aspiration. When we go all the way down to nip, I didn't do it in that pronunciation because I'm trying to be clear, but in natural speech, I tend to say nip, and my mouth does not open again. I don't usually say nippa, right? Or nip it, or nip.
Mm-hmm.
Any version with the mouth opens, I don't usually say it. I usually say nip, and that's it. It's the end of the word. So I have a small symbol there above the P that looks like a little right angle, and that means unreleased. So the P, as mentioned in the very beginning, you close the mouth and the lips touch. The release dictates aspiration or no aspiration. With no release, there is no aspiration. It's an entirely different articulation. So with P alone, we have 3 different articulations in English. I want to give a small explanation of why this is. It's not arbitrary. P is only aspirated in initial position. We can talk more about syllables later, but for now it's suffice to say that if P is in the front of a word, it will be aspirated.
You don't want to mention the onset of a stress syllable too, like?
Let's save it. Yeah. Let's save that.
Small note for the linguists who are listening, we're aware of the stress conditioning and tactics. To keep things simple, we're looking at 1-syllable words, and within this domain, we can say at the beginning of a word, P will be aspirated. In spin, it's also a 1-syllable word, and P is unaspirated because it follows S. So S is the beginning of the word, P comes after that, no more aspiration, right?
But I want to also mention that there's variation, right? For other reasons, like you said, emphatic, right? So if you're saying nip, right? Or stop, there's
Express
some,
impatience.
There's
yeah,
variation among communities and within a single speaker even.
absolutely.
And those, I think, as Lisa was pointing to, can be conditioned by context. For example, if you believe someone cannot hear you, you may articulate in a way that you wouldn't normally in casual speech. All right, just as our linguistic note for this page, this pattern of different articulation in different environments, all resolving to a single mental target, is called complementary distribution. So P is never aspirated in that position after S, but it's always aspirated at the beginning and always unreleased at the end. So even though the sounds are different, they don't contrast. So you're able to resolve them to the same target in your mind.
Right. For other languages, you can get a sp versus sp contrast, but not English.
Right. These are not universal rules. They may not even be true for all varieties of English. I doubt it, in fact. But for the variety that we speak, that I'm speaking right now, this rule describes the pattern. Okay, now you might be reaching for your wallet right now because I just gave you a lot of claims and no way to test it. So test it for yourself. So I've given you this working definition of aspiration of a P. So it's a very constrained definition, and it's only constrained to this conversation, of course. It's a puff of air that accompanies the release of P when it is in the beginning of a word. So how can you test this? Well, you can use your hand or a piece of paper. Oop.
What?
I think
We're doing magic tricks over here.
So due to my screen, there we go. I've got one where you can see it now. Okay, I want you to loudly say pin and loudly say spin. So when you look at my screen, you see pin and spin.
Spin.
Peter, I recommend holding it at 2 points across from each other so the paper can easily flex.
I'll try this spearmint again.
It seems to disappear.
Pin. Spin.
Yeah. Yep, I saw it. Yeah.
Now there's a little bit of movement with spin, but there's a big noticeable movement with pin. If you don't have a piece of paper, or if you want to feel it for yourself, you can also use your hand, although you will not be able to see it when I demonstrate this, because my hand is not going to move. But when you put your hand up to your nose, as such, you will say pin and spin. You can really feel the puff of air on your hand when you say pin. Of course, air is coming out for spin as well. That's how...
the release.
That's how... Yeah, that's how sounds generally work. Exceptions, but generally speaking, air comes from out of the lungs, and you stop it for a while, or put some stricture on it. So some air is going to come out with spin, but you will notice a sharp puff with pin, right? And the paper should move more, or you should feel it more in your hand when you do it. We have a couple other homemade tests for other things. If you're interested in this, I think it's very important to test these kind of things so you know when you're out in the wild whether something is aspirated or not. I think it's good to not just test this with P, but test it with K and T as well. We call these voiceless stops in English. That part,
we'll get to that.
That part is not as important, the technical term, and we'll talk more about articulation when we talk about IPA in the next podcast. But for now, just test it with Kate, skate, tore, and store. See what you think. See if you can recognize the pattern. Okay, continuing on, we're talking about words not being letters. Again, the point is, not to sound too redundant, but I can't say it enough, words are not made of letters. Now, when you're writing words, I understand they are, but when we are talking about sounds, especially in a language you're trying to learn, it's important to think of words being composed of sounds rather than being composed of letters. That's because written forms are secondary to the spoken forms, the same way that writing is secondary to speaking or signing. We're not focused on sign language here, but it's important to keep reminding you, sign languages are natural languages as well. So natural language, addition to the analogy of a single individual, natural language itself is extremely old, while writing is relatively new. You might not think writing is new. You might even argue it's perhaps 10,000 years old. we don't have evidence that we don't have historical documented evidence that language is older than 10,000 years old, but we do have evidence when it comes to the comparative method and how many languages families there are and how many distinct ones there are. Even if all language came from a single instance, there couldn't be this many language families in 10,000 years. All evidence of the science of language suggests that language is at least, say, 100,000 years old, some claiming as far as 2 to 4 million years old. Kind of hard to say, you know, how it happened because we have no records of it. Eventually,
microphones that sensitive to reach back.
We don't have microphones. We don't have little tiny wormholes we can look through the past at, or a time machine. If we ever do, I'm going back to Proto World. We're going to check it out. I'll send you a recording. But until then, take my word for it that language is much older than writing, and people were transmitting languages from one generation to the next for 1,000 generations at least before writing was invented.
On this point, it's worth pointing out, if you know any blind people, they acquire spoken language without any problem.
Absolutely.
Or without any reference to the written language even. So that shows that writing cannot, at least for them, it cannot be primary. So it's probably not primary for the rest of us either.
The same in deaf communities. The children speaking, whether they are deaf or not, can acquire sign language very easily. Many people I know try to teach their children sign language before written spoken language because it's sometimes actually easier to acquire. There are even theories called the gestural theory that sign language preceded spoken language in humans. Right. All this to say, writing is an advent. Writing is an invention. Writing is something we agree upon, and it's a pretty useful tool.
Maybe our greatest invention.
I would agree with that. I can't think of anything better off the top of my head.
It's the best thing before sliced bread.
Ding.
Okay, we're introducing a new term in this next title where we say learning a new L2 or heritage language. Now in L2, we have L2 plus here because we're adding a little nuance. Conventionally in linguistics, we use L1 to refer to your native language. That is to say, the language you acquired as a child from your environment. And it could be more than one language.
Yes.
More than one L1. More than one best friend, also possible?
What's that?
Can you have more than one best friend?
Totally.
Nah, Lisa's my best friend. Sorry, Tyler. Okay, so L2 is used for any language acquired after an L1. But if you are an adult language learner, it might matter to you your level of competency in different languages and which domain you use them in. For example, you might learn a language as an adult but speak it every single day. And then you might have a language which you only study, you know, once a week or something, and you're allowed to differentiate these. We're introducing an additional term, heritage language, right? A heritage language is often used to describe a language which is maybe the language of your family, but maybe not completely acquired as an L1. So sometimes people grow up speaking, for example, you may have a language in your house that your parents speak to each other, maybe if they immigrated from one country to another or moved from a community where the language is spoken to a different community within the same country. And most of the conversations happens in the language of the community you're living in, but a small amount of it may happen in the language of the community that you're from.
There can also be overlap between the L1, your first language, and the heritage language. Like in my case, my parents spoke Korean at home and I absorbed it. And then English I learned at school. And then later I took a renewed interest in Korean. So now it's more, you know, more of a balanced bilingual in it.
When I was ages 10 to 20, we lived in Germany. And so we used, English was our heritage language. We used English at home, and everywhere else outside the home was German.
There's a lot of nuance.
Our hosts have experiences with heritage language.
Unfortunately, of us three, I have the least experience with a heritage language. It may surprise you to learn that Schulke is not an English surname, but actually, of course it's not. When I was a very small child, I remember my grandfather trying to teach me Irish Gaelic. Like, you know, I don't remember any of it, of course, but I could claim that that was my heritage language. So we have varying degrees of competency.
That's true, yeah.
While Tyler claimed that his heritage language is English while he was in German. He has fantastic competency in English and Lisa in Korean, but I don't know, 5 words in Irish. So there's a varying level of what it is. Some connection may be more cultural and community-based and identity-based, and some might be more circumstances of travel, such as Tyler's. The important thing is that we are acknowledging that heritage languages do exist, and it might be different from a second language. Your heritage language might still be your first language, too. Suffice it to say, it is possible to master the written system of a language, but not be able to speak or understand the natural spoken version, right?
Which is the case with a lot of language learners, right? They've mastered the written system, but still need to think about the production, right?
That was my experience. And I studied 6 semesters of Japanese and went to Japan for 1 month. And I, had memorized over 1,000 kanji, and I had like all my essential phrases for bootstrapping, but I couldn't understand anybody at all. And nobody could understand me. I was like, what am I doing wrong? I would write it down and people would be like, oh, what am I doing wrong?
Did you ever figure it out?
No. No, I'm still pretty weak. But in Portuguese, my situation was exactly reversed. I learned Portuguese exclusively from listening to spoken language, and writing has been a secondary thing for me. And from my experience with Portuguese, which maybe Portuguese is written a little more similarly to how it's spoken than, say, Japanese. But, I mean, I don't know.
Hard to judge, but seems comparable.
Certainly written, as far as I can tell, more closely to the way it's spoken than English.
Yeah.
And I would say that learning sounds first. When you read the writing later, you're like, oh, I can see why they might spell it that way. But learning writing first and learning the sounds later sometimes is quite confusing, particularly I imagine for speakers of English.
Yeah.
And again, we have the note, some natural languages are signed, not spoken. Important to remember.
We should also mention briefly that most of the languages that we've heard of, that we think about when we think of foreign languages, have written standards, but numerically, in terms of all the languages spoken on Earth at this moment, it's only a minority that are even written down at all.
True. Yeah, that's a good point to make.
Or if they're written down, it's not in any sort of standardized convention. Speakers kind of negotiate it between each other. Okay, now importantly, if you're listening to the LanGoPod, I have to assume you're interested in learning languages. So how can this help you learn languages? Well, first of all, worth noting, not all languages use an alphabet. Tyler has provided us an example here. Would you expand upon that?
Yes, so this is really going to make sense if you're seeing this. But for those of you who are just listening, I've chosen 5 Chinese characters, which, well, the writing system of Chinese is famously not phonetic. Most of the written marks descend from pictures of the thing that the word denotes. Very first example here is z, which means the child. The second one has that same basic graph, but adds a little roof component on top. This is pronounced z. Lisa, do you remember the meaning for this one?
Is it there?
It means a written word.
Letter.
As in kanji.
Yeah, ji, no kanji.
So again, the first one, z, child. Second one, z. Third one is a different graph. This is nu, which means female, woman. Then in the fourth one, I've added the same top component from number 2 and put it on number 3. This one is an, which means to be settled or peaceful. And then the last of the 5 that I've chosen is hao, which means to be good. It combines the woman graph with the child. And the point I want to make is it's really hard to predict from the written form what the sound's going to be. In the first 2 characters, z, z, we can easily perceive the similarity of sound. That's the reason that the second character is written the way it was. But there's no similarity in sound shared by nu, an, and hao.
Even though many strokes are shared, which might not be obvious to the people just listening.
Right.
So these graphs are similar looking, and you might expect, in one case, as Tyler has shown, there is a sound relation between the 2, but in others it falls apart.
Right.
How big is this class that sounds the same?
So in terms of just character composition types, the bulk of them, something like 90%, are phonosemantic, where they're chosen for sound similarity.
Okay.
That's actually most of them, something like 85 to 95%.
And
There's much smaller sets of these sort of arbitrary pairings. I'd like to point out about these 5 words, there are only 3 distinct written shapes associated with them. So we have the child and the woman as primary, and then that roof doesn't occur on its own, but it's only those 3 parts that are combining with each other.
And for more on that, there's a great blog post Tyler's written. The Mandarin series is called Linguistics. So please check it out on our blog.
Okay, so all this to say, again, I'm on the wrong slide. Okay, the more recently a language was first written, as previously mentioned, the more resemblance between written and spoken forms, typically, especially when they're using an alphabet. But learning to speak and hear a new language is a separate skill from writing, right? And if you are interested in speaking a new language, you may want to start thinking about sounds independently of writing.
Absolutely. Right? After all, it's essential for pronunciation, can lead to misunderstandings.
It will certainly help you understand other people and inevitably help them understand you.
Absolutely.
For example, I wasn't going to bring this up earlier, to my great shame, but the first foreign language I tried to learn was Mandarin, in fact. And I had no concept of tone. I didn't understand what it meant. So I was pronouncing everything in an English intonation. And I never met a single Chinese speaker who could understand anything I said, and I became very discouraged. But it's because I was very focused on writing and didn't have the sound concepts I needed.
You got an unsound approach.
It was an unsound approach. It did not work. So now we're going to do a regular segment we're going to call Comparatively Speaking. And we'll have a small example from Korean that words are not letters.
For today, yeah. I think in general we'll just have various examples in a selection of languages, not always the same languages.
Yeah. So we'll take a couple languages and look at how whatever linguistic phenomena works in that language. For Korean, there's a really great example of 2 different letters that are undergoing a sound change in progress. This is a sociolinguistic term, just talking about a sound change happening right now among different speakers. So the vowel A, this is written for those who are listening, it's written like the Korean letter that looks like an H, and it's pronounced A. And then there's another combining vowel. It's all plus E is eh. And what do you think this looks like for the letter?
It's like a
sticking out.
Rotated T with a
rotated T, yeah. Rotated T and then a vertical line next to it. And these 2 are undergoing sound change. Right? They used to be pronounced distinctly. So very distinct pronunciation, A versus eh. Actually, the H-looking letter can be either closer to ash or ah, or closer to a, depending on the word. And then the turn T and vertical line one, is much shorter. But nowadays, the pronunciations are actually converging, and they're both pronounced more like the shorter vowel quality, right? And so some high frequency words, a lot of them are affected by this. So for example, the word for my is nay, nay. And the word for yes is ne, ne. But today you'll hear speakers saying them exactly the same, right? So you could say my house, ne 집, and then yes house, ne 집, right? So it sounds exactly the same. So this is really important for learners to know so they can understand what's going on and also produce that, right? So they're becoming homophones.
Does this also create homophones in the English romanization, or not English, but
No, afraid not. So that's why also I don't like romanization for that reason. It doesn't capture the sound changes or the sound quality very well. Right? I think it's, so the romanization is for this one up here, the H looking one is AE, right? But for English speakers, what do you want to say that at? What do you think that represents? Like,
oh, you mean there's AE?
yeah.
I don't have them in many English words. We have them in.
I would probably pronounce it as like an or sound naively.
Yeah.
Not guessing it's going to be the same as the E sound or similar.
There's a lot of variation with romanization. In fact, the romanizations for Hangul, the Korean alphabet, are different, right? Sometimes HANGUL, sometimes HANGEUL.
Or K instead of a G?
K, yeah. So I prefer to use just the Korean alphabet. All right. Some more comparatively speaking examples from Japanese. Going to turn it over to Tyler Sensei.
Arigato. So here I've included as the first example what we call a couple of particles. Particles are little grammatical words, and in Japanese they help us sort of find our way through the sentence. The first one, pronounced wa, is the topic marker. There's another one, the wa is shown in the example. I also mentioned e here. E means toward. And what's special about these words, what shows us that sound and letters are not the same thing, is that they're written with phonetic symbols whose usual values are ha instead of wa and he instead of e with those initial H's. So my nice example sentence here means in the garden there are two chickens. We'll hear the same sequence of sounds many times. It goes niwa niwa, niwatori ga niwaimasu. So Peter, do you recall any of these words from your
Tori means bird.
Sorry, which one?
Tori.
Good. Tori is the simple word for bird. Here we have a compound, niwatori, meaning the chicken.
Ni means two, numeral two.
Two or, oh yeah, that too. There's a, look at that. There's homophones in English and Japanese, a TO2.
The postposition and the number two. It's a double language homophone. How did we miss this in the earlier slide?
Let us not forget.
Super.
So the very first niwa means garden. And then that ni that follows means in here, in the garden, and then we get the topic marking wa. As for in the garden is how this goes. Niwa niwa. Then we have this compound, garden bird, niwatori means chicken. Ga marks a subject. Then we have a numeral expression. Two feathered animals, two birds, niwa. And then we get our verb comes last, imasu. They exist, they are living. Okay, and then another aspect of Japanese writing that shows a divergence from the sound. We have these very common written sequences of e, or o, u. So sequences of vowel symbols, but these two in most cases, unless there's a specific kind of boundary there, have fused into single long vowels. So whenever we write ei, as in sensei, we don't actually say ei anymore. It's become a long e sound. And this o, u sequence is written twice in the word Tokyo, where it's heard as a long o sound.
Nice.
Questions about that?
Very interesting.
Cool.
I can't believe we just discovered a tutu, ni, homophone across languages.
Sure, Levi will be delighted too.
Yeah, I think this is worthy of a tweet.
It is tweet worthy.
Tweet-worthy. Okay. Now it's time for F, the ineffable. I always say ineffable.
You got it.
I got it though. And this is our recurring segment about wordplay and just fun language phenomenon, because at Lango we take language humor very seriously.
Yes, we do. Very
seriously. And for this first episode segment, we're going to look at silent letters in English.
That's right. So silent letters.
You cannot hear them. Look at it.
It's not what we mean when we say voiceless, but that's, again, a topic for another conversation. So, a silent letter in this context is a letter that is part of a spelling but not pronounced And if you can read and write in English or are interested in it, you have surely noticed this by now. It is a common thing in English. We've already pointed out one when we talked about know, as in the kind of knowledge, to know.
Also, that word surely you just used has a silent E in it. It's all
surely.
Sure.
Okay, so we have behind the scenes been working on making an entire alphabet with silent letters, and we have picked top 3 highlights to share with you. And our first one is the silent letter B, as in subtle.
Det would be another one, yeah.
And it's self-descriptive, of course. So the next one is G, as in gnat, right?
Natural.
Maybe at one time it was pronounced gnat. I don't know. Do you know that, Tyler?
Probably gnat, I think, with an ash.
So we kept the vowel. All right.
Wiktionary is a great source. Let me just take a peek.
Our third one, while Tyler's looking, is L, as in could. I mean, could. Nobody pronounces it as could. I avoided salmon because lots of people actually say salmon, including my own mother.
And my mother, yes.
Really?
Yeah, I think it must be, you read it enough times, you say, well, I need to put the L in there.
It's a feature of motherese, as we've just established.
Indeed. I'm going to be saying it soon as a new mother.
We need a linguisticy note for motherese. That is, believe it or not, the technical linguistics term for how parents speak to children.
Those exaggerated vowel qualities and pitch patterns. So the Old English spelling of this word gnat, I'll put it on the screen, was G-N-T. So probably a really short vowel here. Gnat.
Gnat. Gnat.
Gnat. How you might say good night in a hurry. Gnat. Griffin, Texas.
Texanism. Gnat.
Okay, so we have a challenge for you.
Just let me point, sorry, can I just point out the L in could doesn't belong there. It was never pronounced with an L sound. It just crept in by analogy with would, where it belongs.
It's a truly silent letter. It has no historical correspondent.
And deadly.
Okay, so.
Deadly. SBD. Okay. Challenge.
That's not the challenge. What the challenge is for each letter of the alphabet, can you think of a word in which that letter is silent? Basically, can you make an alphabet of silent letters? So maybe if you were going to go on to C, you might say the C in scent, S-C-E-N-T. You might say that. We would like you to share your lists with us, and we will tell you where at the end of the podcast.
And you may win something. You might win.
You may.
You may. You might. And you may.
Put together those alphabets of silent letters and send them to us.
Yes, please. All right, and a little bit of wordplay from our new book. It's called Some Fun, Tom Pun in Korean. And the title itself is a pun, a play on these words, because Tom means island. And then pun is how you would pronounce fun in Korean, because there's no F, pun. So island fun as well. And I'm going to tell you a hilarious joke from this collection. This collection features all of our favorite Konglish or Korean English jokes. And Tyler, there you go. He's going to momentarily show the book here, beautifully designed by our illustrator, Farah Yu, and edited together by me and Tyler. And I'm going to share one of them. One of my favorites has to do with the cookie. All right.
Page number.
All right, guys. So what did the cookie say to his friends when he was ready to go?
I'll guess. I'm baked. I don't know.
That's really cute. That's a nice one for our English collection later. All right, so the explanation. In Korean, when it's time to go, you say to your friends, 가자. Okay, that means let's go. And this phrase sounds like the word for cookie, which is 과자, which means snack in Korean, right? And cookie is a type of snack. So when the bossy cookie is ready to go, it will say to its other cookie friends, 과자.
Oh.
Peter likes it.
I approve.
For more of those gems, please check out our book. It's available on Amazon in both printed and ebook formats. And lots of hilarity. You'll laugh, and maybe you'll occasional groan in there too.
It'll be growing on you.
It'll groan on you for sure. All right. Also, we want to talk a little bit about our upcoming events. New for since the Corona apocalypse, for the pandemic era, we've started these online conversation hours, kind of as a source, a way to practice your target language, and also just a source of fun in this otherwise kind of grim time, right? We host weekly online conversation hours in your target language. Upcoming, we have English next Thursday, Spanish conversation, and happy hour. So BYOB.
Let's read these out in full in case people are just listening.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So next week, Thursday, June 18th at 5:30, English conversation hour. The following day, Friday, the 19th at 5:30, Spanish conversation and happy hour. And both of these are actually focused on idioms and slang.
Okay? And they're on Zoom, and you can join us from anywhere.
Yes, anywhere from your couch.
But the times are Dallas,
yes.
Central.
Yes, Pete. Good to point out. And then the week after that, Tuesday, June 23rd at 4 p.m., so a little bit earlier, is the Korean conversation hour. And this one will be a role play situation. It's going to be at the Korean restaurant. Okay, so this is for a little bit advanced beginner level for this one. All right. For more conversation hours and when they're happening, check out our website for the schedule. And if you're interested, drop us a message and we'll add you. We'll email you directly with the invite. All right. If you want to learn with us, please do. If you're interested in our language programs, please contact us at learn@langoinstitute.com. And then if you have any questions for any of us, please contact us. Our first name at langoinstitute.com. So Peter at Lango, Tyler at Lango, Lisa at Lango. And it could be anything about the podcast, ask Peter, or even the languages that we specialize in. So Peter, what are yours?
Well, many Austronesian languages, of course.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But if you're not interested in languages with small numbers of speakers, I think the official languages I'm doing right now are English and Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese.
Hey, Peter, you should join our Japanese and Chinese since you have some experience.
Hi, ikimashou.
Gambatte ne.
And then Tyler, you have a bunch too?
One or two.
Yep. And then me for Korean, or anything about language variation and change. All right, and then I'm going to turn over to Peter to plug our next episode.
All right, so please join us for our next Lango podcast, which will be coming to you soon. We are planning to talk about the IPA, and we will come with many more things. What's that?
Not the beer, but you can bring an IPA too.
You're welcome to bring your own form of IPA. The version we'll be discussing in the podcast is International Phonetic Alphabet. And we will come with many more fun segments for comparatively speaking, FD and Effable, and even maybe some more puns if you're lucky.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sound, mind, and body.
Absolutely.
That's sound advice.
All right. So thank you for joining us on this. Oh my goodness. You too.
Yes. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks for joining our first episode. And we will speak soon.
안녕히 계세요.
Bye, y'all. 안녕히 계세요.